So good evening and thank you all for coming to our webinar on Croaks, Peeps, and Color, Exploring the World of Amphibian Communication. My name is Carrie Wickstead and I am the Amphibian and Reptile and Invasive Species Program Manager for the partners for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And with that role, I also serve as the state agency's coordinator for amphibian and reptile conservation, aka PARC. So I'm coming at you from my two different roles here. And so I do want to qualify that while I'm a program manager for amphibians and reptiles, I am not a herpetologist by trade. So for those of you that know me, my background's in plants, but I'm a huge nature nerd. And it was really fun researching the information for this presentation. And I hope you walk away with some information as well. So I'd like to welcome you all officially to Amphibian Week. This is our third year of Amphibian Week, and Amphibian Week is an awareness week focused on all things amphibian. And the home of Amphibian Week is actually with PARC. So we started it in 2020, and we've been experiencing tremendous growth since then, thanks to our many partners and folks like you who are also interested in amphibians. So if you haven't checked out our page, I'm going to throw a link in the chat that has multiple links, but there's lots of great stuff on this year's Amphibian Week page. We've got these beautiful posters that you can fill out a form to download for free. They were designed by Isla from Frog Cult. We've got videos of amphibian biologists. We had an art contest for students, and you can see our winners up there, as well as a few other goodies to learn and enjoy and appreciate amphibians. So I hope you consider participating in the rest of Amphibian Week that we have. We've got a few more events that are happening both in person and online, so please check them out on our website. For those of you who are unfamiliar with PARC, we are an unaffiliated partnership, and we are all about forging proactive partnerships to conserve amphibians, reptiles, and the places that they live. And so we are a project of the Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy, ARC. They are the 501c3 that helps support PARC. And much of the work that is done within the PARC network is all done by amazing volunteers. And so if you're ever interested in getting involved in amphibian and reptile conservation at the national level, we're always looking for folks to help volunteer with different projects and some of our national task teams. So since you're hanging out with me for a talk on amphibians, I likely don't have to go into a lot of information about why amphibians are important, but they do have a lot of very important functions that often go unnoticed. So obviously, amphibians, like many other animals, serve as both important predators and prey. So in particular, a lot of our amphibians eat a lot of invertebrate species. So worms, snails, slugs, mosquitoes, all of the above. And some animals like our bullfrogs, if it fits, I eat. So essentially anything that fits in their mouth, they will eat it. Some of our amphibians also help cycle nutrients by stirring up debris at the bottom of ponds in different areas, or just having these explosive breeding cycles and lots of individuals that might die off at a particular time that's producing those nutrients going back into ecosystems. And because they have this semi-permeable skin and complex life cycles that include often components in the water and on land, they're really good at being that first line of telling us when something might be wrong in ecosystems. So we can often call them ecosystem indicators, because often they're very sensitive to changes in the environment. From a medical perspective and a biotechnology perspective, we also look at some of the amazing adaptations that our amphibians have and try to employ them to help solve human problems. For example, the frog that I have pictured here on the screen, this is our wood frog, which is found here in the eastern United States where I live. And you can also find it up north. It's one of the, or maybe the only frog species that you can find in Alaska. And it is able to live in such cold climates because it essentially has an antifreeze-like substance in its blood. It has extra glucose in its blood, and it allows it to freeze for sometimes 6 months out of the year, without harm to the individual. And so researchers are actually looking at how the wood frog can essentially freeze its organs and still survive and be able to create cryoprotectants to help with organ transports and organ, donations and stuff of that nature. So looking at antimicrobial properties of slime on, the skin of frogs and salamanders might also help us develop different types of drugs and tools to help with surgeries and also disinfectants and all of that. So lots of different amazing things that amphibians bring to us, both ecologically, culturally, socially, and then medically as well. So you're here to learn about amphibian communication, and as you likely know, amphibians communicate in many different ways. So when people think of amphibian communication, however, most of the time they think about just simply sound, the calls of frogs and toads. But they also have a lot of other ways that they communicate with either each other or other species in their environment. Some of it's as simple as bright warning colors like poison dart frogs to let you know you don't want to mess with me. Some amphibians also have specific types of movement. Some of it is for moving, like dances almost, to attract potential mates, and some of it's to warn others. They have obviously certain sounds that they create, and they also can have some physical touch types of communications, particularly within a single species. And then there are also amphibians that employ chemical communications. And so we'll dive into that a little bit later in the presentation. So poison dart frogs are usually the classic case of warning coloration with those bright colors that they produce to essentially warn other organisms of the potential poisons that they contain. And so you can see a selection of different poison dart frogs down in Central America. And Mullerian mimicry is when essentially unpalatable or distasteful species look like each other. And that allows essentially a predator to learn one color pattern is something that I don't want to eat or try to eat. And so when we often talk about Mullerian mimicry, we talk about it in terms of invertebrates like butterflies, such as the monarch butterfly and the close look-alike, the viceroy. Both of them have a degree of unpalatability to different bird species, and so those similar color patterns help those birds distinguish them. And so there are actually some poison dart frogs, the Ranadomaya poison frogs in the Peruvian Amazon. They're a rare example of Mullerian mimicry that actually happens in vertebrate species. And here in the center of the screen, you can see 4 different color patterns of just one species, the imitator species. So the different color patterns essentially are there to mimic other species of poison dart frogs that live in similar areas. And so there's just, a degree of geographic isolation that happens. And so these imitator frogs will look like those other species in those areas. So these frogs also have been found to essentially court the same colored mimics, which suggests that there is some of this divergence that's happening in mimicry, and that helps play a role in that reproductive isolation and maybe even eventually the splitting of this species longer down the line. So, research by Stuckert et al., and this is a picture from that research project. They found that these divergent color patterns are likely to be affected by combinations of gene expression and color morph-specific gene variants. So a lot of stuff that's coming into play there. Moving along, scientists have recently found that many amphibian species actually biofluoresce. And so biofluorescence is essentially the ability to absorb visible and ultraviolet light and re-emit it at a lower energy level. In the case of a lot of our amphibians, they're absorbing blue light and re-emitting it as green light, as you can see on the screen here. So these photos are actually from a research project by a PARC member, Dr. Jennifer Lamb, who used to be one of our co-chairs of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Team, and her different colleagues who looked at biofluorescence in salamanders and other amphibians. And so the reason that these creatures biofluoresce isn't exactly known at this point in time. However, there has been some recent research that just got published within the last couple of weeks by Jonathan Cox and Benjamin Fitzpatrick that found that biofluorescence of the southern gray-cheeked salamander, essentially there were different color patterns between the males and the females. The biofluorescent patterns were different, so it might be used to be able to do that distinction between the different sexes. Another way that amphibians might communicate is through this process known as the Unken Reflex. And the Unken Reflex essentially is a defensive posture employed by some frogs, like you can see here on the screen, some toads, salamanders, and newts. Essentially, the Unken Reflex is there to warn potential predators before an attack and essentially tell them to step off. So the individuals will often arch their bodies up. They usually raise up their heads and their butts to reveal these hidden warning colors that are on the underside. And the reason the colors are on the underside is it allows the top side of the animal to be camouflaged within their environment. But when they're threatened, they can kind of show off these bright colors there. So usually they close their eyes and kind of put their legs and their hands and feet up on display. And those that have poisons will release some of those poisons to also have that kind of toxic effect happening in that process. So some Unken reflexes are kind of extreme, like what you see here on the screen with these toads. And here's another example with the rough-skinned newt, which is a highly toxic newt found out in the northwestern United States. So these are extreme examples of the Unken reflex, and some are a lot less dramatic. It really depends on the individual, the threat level, and the species. All those factors kind of play into that communication that they do. Moving along to what looks like a grumpy frog here. This is the Panamanian golden frog. And this is a species that the Panamanians look to as a symbol of good luck. And as legend has it, the frog turns gold after they die, and anyone who happens on the frogs in the wild will be blessed with prosperity. So these are actually critically endangered frogs, and they're highly toxic yet social animals. And they call to other golden frogs, and they also make calls to other species in their environment. They're also known to use these different hand signals where they put up their hands and wave. Some of these movements with their hands can be friendly, and sometimes they can be aggressive. So for example, it often waves and lifts its foot up at potential predators to let them know that these frogs are really, really pretty, but they're also extremely toxic, and you don't want to try to eat me. So while vocalizations are uncommon with salamander species, there actually are a few salamander species that can make noises. Notably in the Pacific Northwest, we have the Pacific giant salamander, and that makes barking and growling noises when it's threatened or upset. And then we have species like the mud puppy here in central North America, and they get their common name essentially because they make squeaking or squealing noises when they're distressed. So these mud puppies are large salamanders with red feathery gills, and they never leave the water. So now I'm going to show you a quick video of a grumpy Pacific giant salamander. And this video was taken by Mike Westfall, who was the former co-chair of PARC's Federal Agency Steering Committee. So I'll play this really quick and you'll hear it's growling. Everybody hear that? Grumpy salamanders. So just like us, frogs produce sounds by passing exhaled air, I keep saying hair, over their lungs or over their vocal cords while coordinating the ventilation of their lungs. But frogs breathe a little differently than humans because they bring air through their nose by expanding the floor of their mouth. So that helps with them getting in a lot of air essentially into their oral cavity. They close off their nostrils, raise up the floor of their mouth, and force that air into their lungs. When that air is exhaled, it flows over their vocal cords, which helps vibrate to produce sound. So a lot of frogs have those essentially vocal pouches in the front, but sometimes they can also have it on the sides of their bodies there. So these sounds, as they're breathing in that air, it helps expand those vocal sacs and essentially to create these sound resignation chambers. And so it's really important to note that these frogs, the types of calls that they're doing can vary within a species. It can vary by the size of the individual. It can vary by the geographic location of the individual. And sometimes environmental factors like temperature can also come into play with the different calls that they do. The other thing I want to mention is that they're circular breathers. So by closing off their nostrils and inhaling or getting that air in and closing off their nostrils, they can cause that air to kind of loop around multiple times. So one breath can cause multiple croaks and all of that. So I am living in Maryland, and I'm going to show you a few species of frogs and toads that are found in my area. And I'm going to start with the pickerel frog here. So this is a frog that has very distinct kind of rectangular patterns that go down its back. It's a medium-sized frog, and it has a call that sounds kind of like a snore. And it has a soft grating snore that lasts about 2 seconds. So it's a short snore that it does. And occasionally they can also do some grunts and garbles. In northern areas where the northern leopard frog can be found, they can also have kind of a snore call, but the northern leopard frogs have a longer snore. So I'm going to play the pickerel snore for you really quick. It's an interesting call to hear out in the wild. You hear this random snoring sound from the wetlands and all of that, and that's a good indicator that you've got some pickerel frogs around. So while the southern leopard frogs can look like pickerel frogs, their calls are extremely different. So the southern leopard frogs have spots going down its back, and you can also see that distinct ridge going down its back as well. So the southern leopard frog, super, super noisy. You usually get like clusters of a bunch of them, and it just sounds like a bunch of cackling that's happening out in the wetlands. They have guttural croaks that are followed by clucking or chuckling trills. And some people say it sounds kind of like rubbing your hands on an inflated balloon. So why don't you give this a listen and tell me what you think it sounds like. And there were a few other species calling in the background as well, but hopefully you heard that kind of guttural noises and all of that of our southern leopard frog. So moving along to the northern cricket frog, this is a small member of the tree frog family that lives along edges of slow-moving water bodies like ponds and lakes. It usually has this dark triangular patch in between the eyes, and it makes a distinct clicking noise that kind of sounds like people clacking marbles or pebbles together, essentially. So using the snout to vent length as an indicator of body size, researchers have found that longer snout to vent lengths, so bigger frogs essentially, have lower frequency calls and lower pulse rates. And so the production of lower frequency sounds can be attributed to some of the slower movements of essentially the physiological structures of the frog. So they again make this kind of clicking noise and all of that, and they're very, very prominent. You'll often hear a bunch of them clicking. So I'm going to play this really quick. Play that again. It was kind of fast. So sometimes people will confuse the cricket frog with an insect call, which is how it gets its name, the cricket frog. So in parts of Maryland, we also have the carpenter frog, and this can be heard in different types of marshes, particularly ones that have sphagnum moss in them. And just like with the cricket frogs, the intensity of the calls varies with body size, and smaller males have higher pitched calls and lower intensity relative to larger males. And I feel like their call kind of sounds like somebody working like a ratchet. So let me play this for you. The click it, clack it, clack it kind of noise there. Somebody working on a car. All right, the last call that I'm going to give you for a Maryland species is the eastern spadefoot toad. And hands down, this is my favorite local call. And I jokingly describe their call as what I think a barking sheep would sound like. So these toads spend much of their time underground. So they're what we call a fossorial species. And but when we get really heavy rains, particularly in late spring, they all come up to the surface and they have what is known as an explosive breeding event where like literally thousands of them will come up out of seemingly nowhere, come up to breed. Oftentimes the males will call while floating in the water, and you'll often see them and hear them in these really large aggregations. And they're called spadefoot toads because they have this appendage here on their hind feet, this little sickle-shaped spade essentially that helps them be able to dig into sandy soil and dig into the earth to be able to burrow down. So listen to this noise. This is my favorite noise just because it's just a weird, awkward noise. And let me know in the chat if you've heard any eastern spadefoot toads out your way. All right, moving along, while discussing sounds, I can't help but also include one from a unique species that's found over in Africa. So the desert rain frog is a plump little frog species that's found in a very small spot of land between Namibia and South Africa. And unlike most other species of frogs, it actually develops directly from the egg into adults without passing through that tadpole stage. And some of that is because of the place that it lives in. It lives in these foggy dune habitats that are extremely dry. So they don't really have standing water and the luxury of essentially being able to breed in that water. And fog is so essential for their survival because it's really providing most of the moisture that these frogs receive in that area. So when they're threatened, they have an extremely formidable screech. So prepare yourselves for the desert rain frog.
But sometimes more unexpected sounds grab our attention. Like this desert rain frog. Squeaking viral sensation. "11 million hits and counting." It sounds like a dog toy. But actually, this is the sonorous war cry of a very angry frog.
So always have to play that just because it does sound like a dog toy. It's a really cool frog species. And because of its limited habitat distribution and climate change and development and all of that, it is a species that is highly threatened as well. So raising up its profile is very important for this species. It's also important to note that overall, calling takes a lot of energy and requires high levels of aerobic respiration. And so for many of the frogs, I mean, the calls that I've been playing are mainly those mating selection calls, but they do have other calls that they use to communicate with one another as well. But calling is usually done to attract potential mates, and it's a way to show off your fitness. So how high you can call, how long you can call, how many repeats you can do in a minute sometimes can give an indication of your physical status there. And one record calling frog species is the small-headed tree frog, which is found down in Central America. And it produces as many as 100 notes per minute for several hours, requiring up to 25 times more oxygen than if it was just, not calling. So that's pretty amazing for this extremely tiny animal to be able to do. And again, the more that it calls, the more that it shows off that I'm a big, strong animal and I would produce good babies. So frogs certainly will also use other parts of their environment to amplify noises. So some of them will use leaves or leaf litter or rolled up, large leaves and things like that to amplify noises. Sometimes they use water to amplify noises. And in urban areas, they've been found to use things like pipes and storm drains and the like, essentially to help amplify noises. So they're, adapting to these urban situations. So I'm going to play this call really quick. Listen to the first couple pitches before it kind of sinks down into the water, and notice how they change once it sinks down into the water. Did you hear that change? So that was an example of one of the tree hole frogs that uses tree holes that fill up with water to essentially change the pitches of the sounds that it makes. So there are also these species called the concave-eared torrent frogs that live in noisy places along fast-moving streams in Asia. And so to overcome, essentially all of that stream noise that happens and be able to call over those stream noises, they actually communicate in ultrasonic frequencies, so outside of the human range of hearing, essentially. So to be able to hear those calls, because a lot of animals can't hear in ultrasonic frequencies, they have these really specialized eardrums, the tympanums, essentially. And there are differences between the male and the female tympanums to be able to hear the different calls between the sexes. And so this allows them to hear at different ranges and above noisy environments as well, which is a really neat adaptation that they have. And one question you might ask yourself, at least one question that I asked myself when researching this this whole presentation, was essentially, do frogs have accents? Or do animals have accents based on where they're found at geographically? And the answer is yes. So frog accents frogs have been found to have accents from places further away from each other. And so somewhat surprisingly, some of these accents also changed over time. And sometimes the calls made only a few days apart could be similar than calls made a month apart. So sometimes, it could really change with an individual, just a few days with a few months apart, or also across a species range. So, and that all is thanks to data that was collected from community science projects. So another reason why it's so important to have you all out there doing stuff like Frog Watch. So some frogs also incorporate movement with their communications that they do, the vocal communications. And so this is the Brazilian torrent frog. So what they do is they have, the males will call, and they also do these long-range displays. And so I've got a graphic here from the research paper. You'll see a little bit of it in the video, but not too much, essentially. So if you look at its back foot, he's moving his foot just a little bit. He's calling. You see that foot movement some more. And you're going to see a bigger foot movement in a second. So it might not look much to you and me, but to other frogs, it has a lot of meaning. And even just those flicks of the feet also have some meanings as a display and a way to communicate with other individuals. It's important to note that not only is calling and doing these dance movements and the hand waving and all of that, not only does it costs a lot of energy, but it also is really, it makes these animals a lot more visible to potential predators as well. So there is a bit of a trade-off about showing off, essentially, for other organisms or for other individuals of your species, because it makes it easier for predators to find you and eat you. And I see a question from Matthew: does the female frog answer the male's dance? And some species they do. I know in like the Panamanian golden frogs, they have like different hand signals that they do to one another, and it helps them like determine if they're receptive or not. And so I don't know about the Brazilian torrent frog, but I imagine they probably do have, some type of way to show receptivity and all of that. So moving along to chemical communication, there are multiple forms of chemical communication that occur in amphibians. And chemical communication typically is a lot more common in salamander and newt species, but we do see some frogs and toads also using these chemical forms of communication. So this is from a research paper that looks at chemical signaling in amphibians, and you can just see that there are different glands that produce the chemicals and locations. A lot of times the chemical glands are associated with males, but not all the time. And, there are a lot of unknowns, essentially, like what is the function of those chemical signals, what components are being used, and the nature of the chemical makeup of these different things that are being produced. So this is an area that's really ripe for research, essentially. So in our local species, the eastern newt, the male eastern newt species have cloacals, so essentially in their vents, and then also cheek glands. And so they're known to apply secretions to the female's nose by fanning his tail, but also by grabbing her and rubbing his face all over her, essentially. And so that helps, like, indicate his fitness level to potential females that he might not want to mate with. Males and females also release chemicals into the water to indicate not only that they're present, but also their breeding status. So females can release chemicals and hormones essentially to let individuals know in the area if they're, getting ready to breed or if they're of age essentially. So interestingly enough, males in the eastern newt species will react to female hormones and chemicals in the water, but they don't always react to male chemicals. So they don't really have that kind of interest-specific competition with some of the chemicals in the water. The other thing that was noted with some of these studies is that the males seem to prefer larger females too, and some of that could be picked up in those chemical signatures being put out into the water. So one of our most common salamander species in the eastern United States is the redback salamander, Plethodon cinereus. And interestingly enough, several research studies have indicated their poop, or their fecal pellets, if you want to use the scientifically accurate term, actually from the males tells details about his diet, essentially, which makes sense. But essentially, females will examine male fecal pellets to, see if he's eating good or not, and that's an indicator if he has, good fitness and might be good breeding potential and all of that. So, so there are also some archaic frogs that, individuals will use fecal pellets to determine their own, relatives and all of that. So yeah, there's another world of exploring salamander and frog poop and learning about how they communicate with one another in that regard. So amphibians are really, really awesome. I went over some different communication information about them and all of that. And there's so many different things that we can learn from amphibians and benefit from amphibians. But unfortunately, amphibians are under threat for a number of reasons. First and foremost, like most other species, we have habitat loss and degradation working against our amphibians. We also have introduced species. Invasive species or non-native species that cause problems. So some of these are introduced species of other amphibians. For example, in the western United States, bullfrogs, which are native to where I'm at in the eastern United States, have been introduced. And as I said earlier, bullfrogs eat almost anything that fits into their mouth. And so out in the western United States, they can be very detrimental to a lot of our at-risk amphibian species that are much smaller than those introduced bullfrogs. We have climate change that's also affecting our different frogs and other amphibian species. So changes in precipitation, temperature, the frequency of major storm events, and all of that are all affecting our different organisms. And in the world of amphibians and amphibian communication, it's changing some of the body sizes of these amphibians. And if you remember from what I mentioned earlier, the length of many of these amphibians are going to change the pitches and the tunes that they're using. And so climate change can have an impact on essentially their ability to communicate and the duration and the timing of their communication. We do see roads as a big factor for mortality with our amphibians, particularly ones that try to migrate from areas that have been, split by roads. So some of our larger salamander species, like marbled salamanders and spotted salamanders, frequently cross roads during the breeding season to be able to get to the other side to breed. And I saw in the chat earlier that somebody also helped move a turtle. So other reptile and amphibian species are also on the move, and roads can be a threat to them. With our amphibians, we also have the different types of diseases like rhinovirus and chytrid fungus, which are affecting the different populations across North America. And over in Europe, there's a disease called Biesal, which is a salamander chytrid fungus, Bactrochytrium salamandivorans, and Biesal for short. It's a pathogen that essentially eats the salamander skin and causes significant mortality with these salamander and newt species over in Europe where it's been discovered so far. It isn't here in North America yet, at least to our knowledge, and we're very fortunate to have the North American Beesol Task Force that's trying to work on ways to kind of be prepared before it hits. But it could be extremely devastating to North America, particularly the southern Appalachians, where we have the highest number of salamander species in the entire world. So check out the North American Beesol Task Force if you want to learn more about this disease and essentially what's being done here in North America in terms of preventing it and managing its spread. Finally, you're all here because you like amphibians. At least I hope you're here because you like amphibians in some way, shape, or form. But we do have a lot of people who don't like amphibians because they're slimy and or ugly or for other reasons. And so either they don't care about amphibians and all of that, there's that apathy. And then there's some people who deliberately persecute certain species as well. And those are also problematic too. But I can't leave you with all the sad stuff, right? Because there's lots of ways to help. And one of the biggest things is education. It's key to helping people learn, understand, and appreciate all the different critters and their functions all around us. You can also help a lot of amphibians in your own backyard by creating habitat to help support them. Planting species that are native to your area are going to bring in insects. And when you bring in those insects, you're going to bring in food for a lot of our different amphibian species. And they're also going to help you essentially keep those pest populations down and under control. The other thing to keep in mind is limiting pesticide use. So using insecticides, herbicides, and things like that, they might have negative effects on amphibians because of that semi-permeable skin, or might be doing stuff to their typical food items that they would eat. So anything you can do in your backyard to help with planting native plants and reducing pesticide uses is ultimately going to help amphibians and other wildlife species. I have get the shell off the road, but get the herps off the road if it's safe to do so. Help them across the road and move them to the side that they're traveling to. And make sure you keep wild animals wild. So in a lot of areas, you can legally collect some of our amphibian and reptile species, but we do find that a lot of these animals collected from the wild do not do well in captivity. And so it's much better if you want to bring an amphibian or reptile into your home, consider adopting one, because there's lots of them out there that need homes, or going to places that are reputable breeders and things like that to get some that have been captive raised, essentially. But at least in the world of turtles, we deal a lot with the illegal trade in North American turtle species. And certainly with some of these amphibian species, there's also legal trade. So it's important to be an informed buyer if you are going to bring an amphibian or a reptile into your home. If you do have pets, don't release them and, or release captive animals because they can inadvertently bring some of those diseases into our wild populations. And a really good practice before going out to wetlands and other areas that have amphibians in them and all of that is also to disinfect your shoes and other equipment. So cleaning them off with disinfectants like a light bleach solution, making sure that bleach is fully washed off, but that all is going to help prevent the spread of some of these pathogens. And one of the links that I'll add to the Wakelet from Northeast PARC actually has some recommended disinfection protocols. And they're currently working on updating the video that we have as well. So you can also get involved. It makes my heart nice and warm and happy to see so many folks involved in Frog Watch as well here. So Frog Watch, if you're not familiar with it, is a community science program that was established in the late 1990s to provide folks a way to essentially monitor frog and toad calls in your communities. And so you get trained to listen for the different frog and toad calls and be able to identify them and monitor them. And all that information goes into a national database It helps us understand, local populations, shifts in populations. It's helping us also understand where some of these invasive and non-native species are moving into and all of that. So the program used to be with the Associations of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, but it's now housed with Akron Zoo. And so you can check out Frog Watch USA for more information. And I also have to put in a couple plugs for PARC. So if this is your first time experiencing Amphibian Week, I hope you consider joining us for some of the other events that we have happening in person and online this week. And maybe putting out information with the hashtag Amphibian Week on your own social media channels as well. So we do have a monthly newsletter that we put out, and so we're always happy to have more folks grow our network and learn about all the great things that are being done at the national park level, but also at the regional park levels. And so we've got regional parks like in the Northeast with Northeast Park, or the Southwest, Southwest Park, etc. We even have Caribbean Park out there. So they're a park for you to get involved and learn more and about local reptiles and amphibians, and also get engaged with a community of other folks interested in our herps. So later this month, we will have Wild Turtle Week, and I see Matthew put the shameless plug in there for World Turtle Day happening at the Natural History Society of Maryland on May 21st. So that is in Baltimore. Wild Turtle Week's mostly going to be a social media campaign, but keep an eye out. We'll have more materials showing up on our website very soon, and we hope you also participate in that awareness week. And during Wild Turtle Week, we will also have some researchers from Florida talking about snake pentastomes, which are parasitic crustaceans that specifically one invasive pentastome that is now in southern Florida and might have the potential to spread to other parts of the United States. So that is being hosted by PARC's Disease Task Team, and you're welcome to join us for that as well. So with that, I will open the floor to any questions that you might have. So again, please check out our PARC pages and Amphibian Week and all of that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. So either you can unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can also ask questions in the chat.